I'm going to explain it as soon as you guys are done writing. I just don't want to explain it while you're writing because you won't hear me. So like I said, once you're done writing, just put your pen or pencil down so that I know when I'm going to explain this to you. Just throwing water bottles is fine. Alrighty, so if I say something that helps this make more sense, make sure to write it down so that you can come back to it. So let's talk about this. When we're looking at a sentence, here are the parts of our sentence. The subject is who does the verb, the main action of the sentence. In English, almost always your subject is going to be at the beginning of the sentence. Once in a while, there will be like a clause before the subject. Like if I said, yesterday my friend and I went to the store. You know that yesterday is not what went to the store. My friend and I went to the store. So that's our subject. It's almost always right at the beginning in English. Same in Spanish. The verb is the action being done. Every sentence has one main action that is being done. The direct object. This is where it gets a little bit trickier. I think some of you guys did some of this like long ago in middle school, but let's talk about it. The direct object is what receives the action of the verb. A verb that has to have someone receive it is called a transitive verb. For example, tener, or to have. In English, if I say, we have, you're left with questions, right? You're like, we have what? What do we have? Because have is a transitive verb that requires a direct object, something on the other side of the verb that receives the action. It begs the question, what is had? So if I say, we have homework, homework is what is had. It receives the action of the verb, so it is the direct object. So when I say, we have what, the what that we have is the direct object. There are also verbs that need two things on the other side of them to make sense. That is when we'll have an indirect object as well as a direct object. The indirect object is the who or what receives the direct object. And when a verb needs two things after it to make sense, it's called a ditransitive verb. Di meaning two, transitive meaning between two things. Ditransitive, it needs two things on the other side of it. So, dar is a good example of that, to give. If I say, he gives, you're going to ask me, what does he give? Who does he give it to? You have two questions. What is he giving and who is he giving it to? So, the what that he's giving is what is receiving the action. What is given. That is our direct object. The person that receives, because I say he gives, you say what does he give and who does he give it to? The person he gives it to is what receives the direct object. So that's the indirect object. So if I said he gives the present to his grandma, the present is what is being given, and his grandma is who receives the present. So we have he is the subject, gives is the verb, the present is the direct object, it's being given, and to his grandma is the indirect object because she receives the direct object, which is the present. There are some verbs, I put down here, that do not have any direct object. They don't need anything after the verb to make sense. I could say, she smiles. You don't need any more information for that to be a sentence that makes sense. I could tell you she smiles at her friend, but I don't have to say at her friend for it to be logical. But I cannot say we have and not add something else on and have it be logical. So some verbs called intransitive verbs, in meaning not, you do not have to go between two different objects, a subject and an object. You can just have a subject and an action. She smiles, he sits. We do not have to add more information for it to be a complete thought. Yes, true.
So when you say detransitive,
Ditransitive, yeah.
Ditransitive, that stem dies like two. So it means that there's going to always be two objects when you have a ditransitive.
Yeah, there will be a direct object and an indirect object in order for it to make sense. Because I can't just say she gives him. I have to say what she gives him, right? Yeah. And I also can't say she gives a present, because then it's like, to who? So yeah, it's exactly like that. You need two things on the other side of it. So let's take a look at what this looks like in context, because that's when it's going to start actually making sense. I know this is a lot of just definitions at the moment. Okay. So I'm going to show you a sentence in English. We're staying in English for now, and I want you to find the subject, the verb, the direct object, and the indirect object if there is any. Laura, I need you to pay attention, please. So, here's our sentence. My friends and I play video games. Write down, my friends and I play video games. And let's talk together about subject, verb, direct object, indirect object. The easiest place to start is almost always with finding the verb. So, in this sentence, I'm going to look for a verb, an action, and I'm going to say, play. Play is an action. So I'm going to say, that's my verb. Now I'm going to ask, who is doing this action? Is it just my friends? No. Is it just me? No. That means my subject is this whole thing, my friends and I. That's my subject. And then what is receiving the action? So if I'm looking at this, I say, what is being played? Video games, yeah. So here is my direct object that receives the action. So there are different parts of that sentence. Who thinks they have done this at some point in the past, maybe in middle school? Okay, cool. We're starting out with something, just a review of something you've done before. Awesome. Let's take a look at another example. If I say, my mom gives me many gifts. This one's a little bit more complex, but we'll start in the same place. What is our action? I'm going to look at this. Gives is our verb. So there's our verb. Then I'm going to ask, who is giving? My mom is giving. So that's my subject. Now, here's where we have to make sure we get direct object and indirect object correct. So when I look at this, I ask myself, what is receiving this action? What is being given? Am I being given, or is a gift being given? A gift is being given. So gifts is my direct object. The way that you can check and make sure that you did that correctly is in the next step, because if you got it backwards, the next step will not work. I say, my indirect object receives the direct object. So in this sentence, am I receiving gifts? Does that sound logical? Yeah, perfect. So me is our indirect object. If I accidentally got this backwards and I said, oh, I am being given things and I am the direct object, then here I would say, okay, so that means that I am being given two gifts. Does that make sense? No. So if you accidentally get it backwards, it'll make sense when you ask yourself, okay, the indirect object receives the direct object. Gifts cannot receive me. So that must be backwards. It has to be me receiving gifts. So that's how you can double check that you have it the right way around. It will not be logical if you get it flipped. Yes, true.
So in Spanish, will there be like this flipping of structure as well?
We'll get to Spanish in a second, but there is some change in the word order. Yes, but I have a formula for you to always know the order of the words. So let's look at a couple more examples in English to make sure this is super solid before we start moving to Spanish. He told me the truth. Take a look by yourself just for a moment, write it down and put in where you think subject, verb, there is both a direct and an indirect object in this one. So see if you can find those 4 parts. All right, let's see what we've got. He told me the truth. Where is my action? What word is my verb? Told. Good. That's my verb. Who is doing the telling? He, so that's my subject right here. Now, what is being told? The truth is being told. So that is my direct object. Now let's check that and make sure the indirect object receives the direct object. Do I receive the truth?
Yes.
Yes, so that makes perfect sense. That is my indirect object. Good. All right. One more for you. I called you. I called you. Do you think this has both a direct and an indirect object? No, there's not enough words. So, what's my action? Called. That's my verb. Who is doing the calling? I am, so that's my subject. And who is receiving the call? You. Yep. So that's my direct object. I give you this example to show you a direct object does not have to be inanimate. It can be a person as well. A person can be the direct object of a sentence. The same way that the subject can be inanimate. Like if I say, I don't know, going back to our unit, I could say like, greenhouse gases affect the planet. Greenhouse gases are not like a person, but they are still the one doing the affecting. So a thing can be a subject. A person can be an object. It doesn't necessarily imply animacy or life to say that it's an object or a subject. Okay, so we've had some examples. Let me show you this really quick. Here are some other sentences. Do not write these ones down. Take dos minutos, talk with your friends, find subject, verb, and direct or indirect objects. Not all of them have both. Take dos minutos, make sure you've got this down. You don't have to write it.
We all know the verbs, so let's like, and we know the subject, so let's just do direct and indirect objects. So what's the direct object of the first one? Him. No.
Yeah, so box is direct.
And the subject
Yeah, you're right.
Him is indirect.
Because him. Well, yeah, because indirect receives the box. So the box is the direct object.
Yeah.
And so fan is just direct object. And then the story. Okay, I told this. The yesterday doesn't matter. So it's so the direct object is story, and indirect is this. Do you think that is that right?
Yeah. And then the cure is direct object and then indirect.
Like, okay, yeah. So my mom's the subject, and I guess discover the cure is direct object. There's no indirect one.
Oh my god, cool.
Thank you. Why are you just like oh wait, that was for psychology.
30 segundos.
How many marbles do you want, John?
You got them all?
I'm gonna guess like
We're experts
130.
of direct and indirect objects. See?
I don't know.
How many marbles do you think are in this?
100.
Well, I think you're supposed to like count how many are on one face and then count like on the bottom and do some multiplications.
That seems like a lot of work.
That's, yeah, that's a lot of effort.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would have to use pi.
What's 240?
240. Ooh.
Whoa.
I feel like that might be a little bit daring, I would guess.
You know what?
Bold, one might
Seems
say.
like it's important, actually.
Gonna go with
It probably is more than people think. I would agree with that. 84.
What do you
Wow,
think?
that is very different.
There's definitely more than 100.
Okay, tres, dos, uno. Let's check and make sure we've got this. So, my friends gave him a box. We know that gave is our verb. We know that my friends are the subject. So, here we have both a direct and an indirect object. What is our direct object?
Box.
A box, good, because that is what is given and he receives it, right? So that makes him the indirect object. Number 2, broke is our verb. I am the subject. Is this a direct or indirect object? It's a direct object. Muy bien. I told them the story yesterday. All right. Who can help me? Where's my verb? Told. Where's my subject? I. Where's my direct object? The story. Good. The story is what is being told, and what is my indirect object? Them. Yep. We can double check and say they received the story. Yeah, that makes sense. Yesterday just kind of gets thrown out. It's an extra piece of information. Technically, this is an adverb because it tells me when I did the action of telling. So it's modifying my verb. But that's okay. This lesson is not about adverbs, so we're not going to pay too much attention to that. All right. ND, my mom discovered the cure. Here's my verb. Here's my subject. The cure, what is that? Direct object. Muy bien. All right. Thumbs up, thumbs in the middle, thumbs down. How are we doing with this so far? Perfecto. All right. You are experts of Inglés. Let's take this over to some Español. This is where I need you to make sure you're paying attention, because this is where if you're not paying attention, you could get lost, and it will be hard to be found. So here we go. Why do we use direct object pronouns? So if you take a look at this right here, read it in your head, tell me what feels unnatural about this little narration. What feels weird about that? What do you think, Whit?
It's like naming the subject multiple times, like we already know what he's talking about.
For sure, yeah. What else, Drew?
They keep on saying the book.
Yeah, exactly. They're naming the subject. They're saying the book, the book, the book, the book, the book, right? So, if you were telling this story, what would you start saying instead of the book? It. Exactly. So when we're saying that we are going to be using direct object pronouns, a pronoun is a thing that substitutes for a noun. So for example, I don't say Senor Lee, Senor Lee, Senor Lee. I say I. I is a pronoun. It substitutes for the noun. So when we have direct object pronouns, they are going to substitute for the direct object. In English, that's like it or them. So instead of saying, I bought the book, I liked the book, we would say, I bought the book, I liked it. It was good. I lent it to my sister. She read it and then lost it. It is our direct object pronoun. It is substituting for the direct object when we don't want to repeat it over and over and over and over. So, what does this look like in Español? We know that a direct object pronoun is how we simplify sentences. Here's what it looks like. We use direct object pronouns to replace the direct object. And these will go directly before the conjugated verbs. And here is what our direct objects become. They're pronouns based on what the direct object is. Write this down real quick and then we're going to explain it. We're going to see some examples. So write it down so that you can hear me when I'm talking about it. Okay, so one of our key words here is that this direct object pronoun will go directly before the conjugated verb. Just like our question earlier, is there going to be change in the order of things? This is an example of a change in the order between English and Spanish. So let me show you an example so that we can look at it. Listen and then write. Listen and then write, because it will make more sense if you listen first. I'll give you time to write. So if we're saying he recycles the container, él recicla el contenedor. Great. Now if we want to say he recycles it, maybe I already said he has a container, he recycles it. I don't want to say the container again. If I want to say he recycles it, it is substituting for the container, el contenedor. We saw on our last slide, el contenedor would be he, she, it, right? So which of these squares is it going to be on our conjugation chart? It's going to be the lo, la. I'm going to change my direct object pronoun based on the gender of the he, she, or it. So el contenedor, do you think I want lo or la? Lo is our masculine. So here, I'm going to substitute lo for it. The last thing that you notice is that instead of saying él recicla lo, which would be the exact same sentence structure as English, our last step is that the it jumps right before the verb. So él lo recicla is how we would say he recycles it. Let me explain one more, and then you can write down what this stuff is. So, I turn off the lights. Yo apago las luces. If I want to say I turn them off, them, I want to find a substitute for las luces. So, las luces, we're going to look back at our chart. We're going to look at the them, the they category. We have los or las. Since it's las luces, we want to use las to say them. And we're going to substitute las. And it jumped before the verb, right? It jumps before our verb. You will notice that this verb is conjugated for the person doing the action. It is not conjugated for las luces. So here, I don't have apagan or apagas or something because I am doing the action. Yo and apago. It's still conjugated in the yo form, just like here. Yo apago. So that's why this verb does not match the last, because the last is saying what is being turned off. The verb is saying who is doing the action, so it has to match our subject. Yo. Yes, Drew.
So, if it was like, I'm just thinking about this, like, in structured forms, like, do people who are native to the language, or once you learn the language, does the structure, like, make sense? Or is it always that your native language is, like, transposed, like, the structure you think is, like, you always think in that structure? Like, I always think subject, verb, and then, like,
Object.
Yeah. I don't think subject, object, verb.
No, I know. So if you're not a native speaker, at first it is going to feel weird. It's going to sound weird. You're going to have to think about it. And realistically, this concept is something that if you continue with Spanish, you're probably going to have to think about it some for quite a while. And that's okay. But after a while, it starts sounding better and better, and it starts sounding more correct. So I know that this takes thought right now, but like if this was your first language, it would sound correct that way, and it would sound weird to say he recycles it instead of he, it recycles. It would sound weird to you because that's not what you're used to. So yeah, it does start sounding more natural. If you have not written this down, go ahead and write this down. And I will also take any other questions that came up while I was explaining that. We're going to look at more examples momentarily.
I love moving
All right. We done writing? We got this? CCC? Continuamos. So, DOPs, direct object pronouns, are necessary when the person is receiving the action as well. So, like earlier when we had, she calls me, and I am receiving the action, here is how you say that in Spanish. You cannot say, so if I have potable water helps you, you are receiving the action of being helped. Potable water, what does potable mean?
Like you can drink it.
You can drink it, yeah, so like drinkable water, safe water, clean water. Potable water is doing the action, that is the subject. So, when we have that situation, you cannot say, agua potable ayuda tú. That is incorrect in Spanish because you are receiving the action. You are a direct object. We have to use the direct object pronoun. So, el agua potable ayuda, helps, ayuda. What is my direct object pronoun for you? Te, on your list, yep. And then our direct object pronoun jumps before the verb. So we end up with el agua potable te ayuda. Who can tell me why is this not el agua potable te ayudas? Why is it not el agua potable te ayudas? What do you got an idea what?
Yeah, she's
Tell me.
agua potable is in plural.
Good is not plural, And when we conjugate a verb, our AS ending is for who?
Ooh.
It's the to form. Are you the one doing the helping? No. Even though there's a te, you are not the one doing the helping. Agua potable, potable water, is the subject that is doing the verb. So we have to conjugate the verb for he, she, it. Potable water is he, she, it. So that's why we have our ending as the present tense, he, she, it ending, ayuda, ayuda. Remember, our verbs do not get an S for being plural or singular, and I'm so glad that that did come up because it gets really confusing when we have all of these different elements right here. But if you need to pull out your present tense conjugation notes so that you can keep everything straight, feel free to do that because I know there are a lot of moving parts at the moment. All right. So, ahora, vamos a pausar un momento. You do not have to write this. You do not have to write this. Sorry, I should have put it in red text. We're going to pause for just a moment. We're going to have a canción to hear some of this in context and to just have a little bit of a brain break because I know that these notes are getting a little bit tricky. So, here I have some letra, the lyrics for you. All right, and sí, no hay, oh, lo siento, ¿es extra?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, perfecto. Gracias. Okay, this is a canción that some of you may have heard before, that I wrote for my students, that we're bringing back this year to practice some direct object pronouns. So, I know, I brought the ukulele. Excuse the ukulele, it is not a professional instrument. It does not exactly hold a tune, so sorry if it's a little bit sketchy. But you see on here, you have las letras, the lyrics. You have some different things, classes that I had. some things that I needed, and I did not have them. So you see in the first verse, en la clase de español, necesito el diccionario. What do I need? The dictionary. Pero no lo tengo. I don't have it. What word substituted for el diccionario?
It.
Low.
Yeah, the lo, the it. Exacto. So you are finding que no tengo. What do I not have? And you are subraya, underlining la palabra que sustituye, the word that substitutes for the thing that I don't have. At the end, you have to listen and make sure that you get the right word, because I left out some lyrics. So, if you're vibing, feel free to sing along. En la clase de español necesito el diccionario, pero no lo tengo. En la clase de matemáticas necesito la calculadora, pero no la tengo. Ahora tengo 20 minutos de detención. En la clase de literatura necesitas las novelas, pero no las tengo. En la clase de arte necesito los marcadores, pero no los tengo. Ahora tengo 40 minutos de detención. Here you have some blanks. En la clase de gimnasia necesito los tenis, pero no, what do you think? Los tengo. Help me on this next one. En la clase de música necesito el instrumento. Here we go, help me. Pero no tengo. Good Lord. Ahora tengo una vida de detención. Bien, clase, gracias. Okay, te toca. With your friends, I need you to help me make a new verse. Come up with a class. Come up with what you need. And come up with how you would say, I don't have it, or I don't have that. With your friends, come up with a verse for me. Okay, gracias.
I think it just called.
Yeah. I just have students that are absent, and I know this is hard, so I want to make sure they can understand. I need some good verses here.
You probably say history.
It's kind of my class. How about tier K? You need
Wait, is that
I'm not say that.
Hay una vida de detención.
You don't really need anything.
In la clase de historia.
Oh no!
I'm gonna do some
Is there an
historia.
opportunity for parole on this lifetime of detention?
I need.
what's the
How do you say notebook?
Gotta be wrote in no test or something. Maybe not, actually not. Because I can no test is test.
Would there be like a little mark on the one that piece? Like on the eye?
For what?
For that piece?
That'd be, yeah. Wait, so what are you saying mathematics?
I'm saying in the clase de historia necesito el lápiz. Pero. No. Low. Would it be low or low? Yeah, it would be low.
For, wait, what's that?
That piece. That piece is lower than. La. I think it's low in this way.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean,
Oh, yeah. You kind of my own.
no, I mean,
verse.
but he's done my
You call me.
Sorry, this is so bad.
Okay, amigos, it's time for our clase 2A remix. Here we go. We're starting over here. You're gonna give me fill in the words. En la clase de historia necesito la pizarra.
Yeah.
La pizarra. Pero no la tengo. Over here. En la clase de historia also necesito la computadora. Help me out, what will it become? Pero no la tengo.
Bring it over here. Bring it over here.
Problemas con mi principal. Here we go again. En la clase de historia necesito los apuntes. Oh, los apuntes, pero no los tengo. All right, over here. En la clase de also historia necesito muchas cosas. Necesito un cuaderno. All right, el cuaderno. What's it become? Pero no. Muy bien. Ahora tengo que tomar apuntes sobre direct object pronouns. Muy bien, amigos. What a great remix. What a great remix. I'm so proud.
Solo attention.
Okay, so we were using lo, la, los, and las to substitute for it or them. We can also use our direct object pronouns to substitute for people when they are the direct object. So let's take a look at, no, this isn't what I wanted yet. Go away. Not that. Let's take a look at what if I am saying you called or you call me. Let's use that. That was an example from earlier. So what is our verb?
Call.
Call. Good. What is our subject?
You.
You. What is my direct object?
Me.
Me. So if I want to express this in Spanish, let's just translate it exactly word for word, and then we'll change our sentence structure to make it the way that it needs to be. So how do I say you? Two. Good. If llamar is my verb, how do I conjugate that for two? Llamas. And when I am the direct object, look at your direct object pronouns. What does it become? Me. So instead of yo, it becomes me. And our direct object pronoun has to jump where?
Before the verb.
Before the verb. So it becomes tú me llamas. That's how I would say you call me. You call me. Or you might have seen this one before. Te amo. This is a common phrase. You might have heard it before because that's how I say I love you. This is in the yo form. Amar, to love. Te is who receives that action, the direct object. So te amo or yo te amo. That's how you say I love you. It switches order. Yes.
Is there like any difference between saying yo te amo and te amo? Like, I feel like if you said te amo versus yo te amo, like it holds different meaning. Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying. Like,
Well, I hear what you're saying.
You understand what
This does definitely emphasize more like who is doing the loving. Like, oh sure, they love you, but I love you. This yo te amo would be like, I love you. Forget other people, I love you. If you wanted to say like love ya in Spanish, like make it less intense, you would actually change the verb and say te quiero.
But amo is like more intense.
Amar is like romantic love. Querer, it can mean to want, but it's also like a friendship love or less intense love. See, both are used. In some countries, even in family, like parents do not say te amo to their kids because it's in some countries it's seen as much more romantic. They would say like te quiero to their kids. Yeah. But we digress. Wow, I never say that in context. Look, I just said it in context. All right, so we can have a direct object as a person or as a thing. Now we gotta add on one last step. This is the last thing we gotta add on, and that is indirect objects. When we have a verb that has two things after it. So, indirect object pronouns are required if there is an indirect object in the sentence. And they will go directly before the verb, just like the direct object. If we have both, we'll see what we do. But go ahead and write this down real quick. And then we're going to take a look at some examples. Alright, so when we have an indirect object in a sentence, we always must include an indirect object pronoun, even if we also name the indirect object. So before, I could say, yo necesito la calculadora, or I could say, yo la necesito. I could say, I need the calculator, or I need it. In indirect objects, even if I explicitly name what the indirect object is, I must include an indirect object pronoun. This is a part of Spanish that we do not have in English, so it is not perfectly translatable, but we will look at some examples and see how this applies. Before we move on, what is the only difference between our indirect object pronouns and our direct object pronouns? Where do you see it? The le and the les, exacto. All of these others are the same. We just have le and les instead of the lo, la, and los, las. You see there is also no difference for gender in indirect object pronouns. Let's look at an example, and then it will start to make more sense. So, again, actually no, here, I'm going to have you write this, and then we're going to explain it so that you can write in notes for what did not make sense. So go ahead and write this down, write down the examples, and then as we talk about it, you can annotate your own notes. Don't get too hung up on writing it down. Just get it written down and then we'll explain it and you can annotate your notes as you go. All right, so let's start this by thinking back through the structure of our sentence in English. So if I always send him the photos. What is my verb? Send. What is my subject? I. What is being sent?
Photos.
The photos, so that's my direct object. And who is receiving the photos? Him. So that's my indirect object. So, here, when we have this indirect object, we don't have to put in a direct object pronoun because I'm not saying it. I can just leave the photos as they are. But I have to do something with my indirect object. So I have this indirect object pronoun, which goes for the he and she for indirect object pronouns, and it's going to go right before the verb. So, yo siempre le mando las fotos a él. Even though I always send the photos to him, because there is an indirect object, I have to put an indirect object pronoun in my sentence. Like I said before, in English we do not do this. We don't say I always to him send the photos to him. But in Spanish we must put this in if there is an indirect object in the sentence. Here's another example. She tells me the information. Verb is tells, subject is she. What is my direct object? The information. And who receives the direct object? Me. So that's my indirect object. Because there is an indirect object in this sentence, I must have an indirect object pronoun. What is your indirect object pronoun for me or I? Me. So here we have our indirect object pronoun. This literally says she to me says the information to me. In English, we would just say she tells the information to me or she tells me the information. In Spanish, we must add in this indirect object pronoun to show who is receiving the information. Like I said, it's not something we do in English, but in Spanish, we do have to do it. So, now, what happens when we have both an indirect object pronoun and a direct object pronoun? Like if I'm saying, I always send them to him instead of I always send the photos to him. Here's what will happen. If we have an IOP and a DOP, here is the formula. This has stars on your paper. IOP plus DOP plus conjugated verb. Or sometimes you might also have subject first. The subject, just like in any other verb, is not required because if I say yo quiero Taco Bell, I could say quiero Taco Bell. Quiero only goes with yo. So that's why you might not always see the subject. But we're going to leave the subject in for now. So it's a little bit more clear. So there is our formula. The indirect object pronoun comes before the direct object pronoun, and then we have the verb. So, we have an example here. He sends me them. We know from earlier context we were talking about the messages. We know from last unit, messages is los mensajes. So, I'm going to have my subject, he. Then I want my indirect object pronoun. So if I'm looking at this, sends is my verb, he is my subject. Them is what is sent, so that's the direct object. I am who receives that object, so I am the indirect object. So I'm going to look at my indirect object pronoun for myself, and I'm going to put me, indirect object pronoun. Then I'm going to look for my direct object pronoun for them, when them is the messages, los mensajes, masculine and plural, so I put los. That's my DOP. And then I have my verb that is conjugated. Who is doing the action of mandar? Who in my sentence or what is doing that action? He is. So I have to make sure I am conjugating in the el form. this can be the trickiest part for some students. Even though there's a me, it's not in the yo form. Even though there's a los, it's not in the ellos form. You have to think about who is doing the action. He is sending the messages, so even though it's separated by a few words, our verb is conjugated for él, he. Now, this last thing down here, this is one of those, if your brain is overwhelmed right now, leave it. It's okay. But if you are like vibing with this is making sense to you, this is a great thing to know. If a verb is not conjugated, then we attach the pronouns to the end of the verb. So if I'm not saying he sends me them, I'm saying you need to send me them. I have two verbs in a row, so I don't conjugate the second verb. I'm going to take these that were before the verb but in the first place and just stick them on to the end of the verb like one big long train of Spanish. So mandar, necesitas mandar, you need to send me them, melos. It just all gets glued onto the end like that. Like I said, if this is like a little bit tricky, your brain is getting confused, throw this out. It's okay. There is no reason that it is at the end. I have no reason to give you if that's what you're going to ask me.
I'm not, I just like want to know why they get separated with spaces, like, what's up with that? Why do you have to glue it together?
I have no answer to that, because that's the way it is. That's just what it is. So that is how you do it if your verb is not conjugated. But again, take that or leave it, whatever is better for you. All right, our very last slide of información. This is your very last piece of information that you have to absorb. When we have an IOP and a DOP, remember we had IOP, DOP, conjugated verb. We cannot have what we call double L's. Meaning if our IOP is le or les, and then our DOP is la, lo, las, or los, we have two L's in a row and we cannot change that. So our le or les changes to se, like that. So in an example, I send him it. Send is our verb. I am the subject. It, information is what is being sent. That's the direct object. Him, he is receiving it. That's our indirect object. When I put this in a sentence, it would be yo, I. Now I want my indirect object pronoun. What's my indirect object pronoun for him? On your chart, what's your indirect object pronoun for him? Or he? Le. The information is la información. So our direct object pronoun would be la. So it would be yo le la mando, but double L's not allowed. So after I write this out and I see, oh no, there's a double L, I take my le and I just change it to se. Like that. Once again, I do not know the reason. I am not smart enough to know why it is that this happens, but this is what happens. We cannot have Leila. We don't want those together. So we change the le to a se. Les would also be changed to se. There is no seis because that sounds too much like seis, which is the number 6. So it becomes just se. Okay, let's take a look at a few examples. To end our day, you do not need to write these down, but it might make more sense if you do. Take a look at these, see what you can do. Actually, before you start looking at these, let's talk really quick about which ones have a direct object and which ones have a direct object and an indirect object, because that will be important for you to know how to conjugate it or how to translate it. So, I recycle it. Is it a direct or indirect object? Direct. So this one doesn't have an indirect object at all. Smoke affects me. I am what is affected. Am I indirect or direct object? Direct. There's no indirect object. How about this next one? Does it have an indirect or just a direct? Just a direct. Good. So you don't have to deal with the doubles until down here. I tell them it. What is my direct object? What is being told? It is being told. Who is receiving it? Them. So that's the only one where you deal with a double pronoun. Take the next 3 minutos. See if you can translate these. You don't have to write them down, but you might want to. And then we're going to talk about it.
Smoke effects.
You affect us? No, that's cat. It doesn't. Come on.
If you don't know the verbs, it's all on our vocab.
I recycle kids. So, well, yo.
So,
Now, if you don't do this on your own before you leave, it will go out of your brain before you come back. So please do work on these practices.
y'all, what's recycle?
I think it's recyclar.
Recyclar, so, yo,
Plural, let's do this together.
Okay.
so it'd be yo,
The first one. How do you say this?
Well, it's direct though.
So it would be, yeah, it would be this. So yo,
Wait, let me see which, if it's recyclar. I think it's recyclar.
Our verb is reciclar, yeah.
Yolo, recycle. That sounds wrong.
Finding like how to recycle. Find the verb. I'm just gonna say recyclar.
so it's probably,
I thought it was recycle. Hey, it's yo.
Recyclo would be
Or y'all.
so it would be, yo,
Yo, recycle.
I'm thinking of like what the A turns into.
The what?
The A, remember?
It's low.
YOLO, recyclar.
What's smoke? Is that
We'll find it.
So be el humo may affect affecto.
Wait, there's a label for how many
El humo may affecto.
Yeah.
What did you get?
We rescue them. Okay, so nosotros, I don't know how to say rescue.
Yeah, my guess is
Rescatar. It's rescatar.
How many here?
Wait, I think it's either 2 or 3 of us. I think it's
Chicos, let's work through one of these together. Let's look at number 3. Let's look at number 3, chicos. Okay, so rescuar.
What he say?
What's our verb for to rescue?
Rescatar.
Rescatar. So how to conjugate that for we?
Rescatamos.
Rescatamos.
Nos
Good. So we have
los
nosotros.
rescatamos.
Rescatamos. How would I say them as a direct object? Oh, are we rescuing ourselves? No, we're rescuing them. So los animales becomes los, and then the los jumps before the verb. So we end up with nosotros los rescatamos. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Alright, wait, how many did you get? It's 89. I said 100. It's 89. One sec.
It's actually an
So,
I know how many. That wasn't the point of it. So if you have fun, let's go.
One.
Yeah, I was like,
All right.
Exactly 150.
Y'all, let's lock this in. Let's make sure that it is making sense. Pay attention. I'm going to give you some answers. So, I recycle it. Yo, I'm going to conjugate my verb reciclar for yo. What does it become? Reciclo it. When it is la botella, what do I substitute on my direct object pronoun chart for la botella? La, because it is feminine and singular. So la, and it jumps before the verb. Yo la reciclo. This would literally be I, it recycle in English, but we just have to flip-flop our order a little bit in Spanish. So this means I recycle it. Smoke affects me. How do I say smoke? El humo. Good. afectar for smoke. Afecto. Afecta. Verbs do not base on gender. They are based on yo, tú, él, ella. So, I am the one affected. What is the direct object pronoun for myself? Me. And it jumps before the verb. El humo me afecta. Smoke me affects, or smoke affects me. Then we have we rescue them. Nosotros. Let's do this in the right order this time, because we gotta do the them first. What does the them become for los animales? Los. And then my verb is conjugated for nosotros because we are doing the action. Rescatamos.
It's not los.
It's not what?
Los.
Oh, yes it is, sorry. I just forgot a letter. My bad. Thank you. Los rescatamos. This one was the trickiest one. So I tell yo, how am I going to conjugate contar for yo? Yo. We'll put an O on the end. It actually is an O-Q-E verb, so it's cuento, but that was not the point. If you had cuento, that's okay. Now, I need, which one comes first? Indirect or direct object pronoun? Which one in here? Indirect. Muy bien. So my indirect object pronoun for them is what? Les. We're going to do this one step at a time. Some of you are a little bit ahead of me. And then it is the information. What's my direct object pronoun for la información? La. Good, because it's feminine. And some of you noticed I have two L's in a row. Can't have double L's. So what does les become? Se. Muy bien. Excelente. Mis amigos. If you haven't yet, take a picture of your notes. Your only tarea is to get that picture uploaded onto Canvas. Yep, I am going to move our Canvas assignment to next class. Do not do it as homework. We'll go over it together next class to make sure that all this is locked in our brains.
So wait.